When a pride of lions encircled a drenched Mustang foal, it seemed that the fragile life was about to vanish into the forgotten corners of the earth. But then, from the riverbed mist emerged a shadow. No rider, no whinny. Just an old horse, blind in one eye, scarred head to hoof, and carrying a past the plains had tried to bury. March on the northern Arizona plains swallowed every sound with an eerie stillness. Gray clouds stretched like worn linen across a silver-red sky, suspended as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. The tall grass, scorched dry by sun and wind, swayed only slightly in the breeze. Not to greet, but to listen. At the edge of a dry creek, where the ground had cracked wide open after a long winter drought, a small figure stumbled forward. A Mustang foal thin, unsteady on its long legs, its coat still soft with youth, and eyes that looked as if they'd already lost everything they once knew. It was only a few months old, too young to understand the world, but old enough to sense that death was hiding in every gust of wind. Its mother hadn't returned after the stormy night. All that remained were trampled tracks, a few strands of blood-matted hair near a bush. No body, no whinny, just silence. The locals, ranchers, rangers, poachers alike, knew all too well that sometimes silence was the only thing left after a hunt. The foal moved by instinct. It sniffed at the vague traces left in the air, dry earth, stagnant water, the fading scent of something that once meant home. But now it was nothing. Just ashes of a memory not yet fully formed. It let out a soft whinny so faint that even the wind ignored it, then kept walking, legs trembling with every step. Black birds circled high above, not out of curiosity, but because they knew. Where weakness exists, opportunity follows. As the sun began to stretch itself over the distant horizon, spilling red light over the cracked terrain, the silence broke not with sound, but with motion. A flicker passed through the tall grass across the dry creek. Then another. Then a third. It wasn't the wind. The foal froze. Its ears perked up, nostrils flared. Instinct whispered that something was wrong, but its legs were still too new to understand how danger truly worked. A lioness emerged from the brush, her eyes like amber shards locked onto her prey. Then came another, and another, 9 in total. They didn't growl, they didn't need to. They moved like ghosts, every step guided by bloodlust and experience. They surrounded the foal. They didn't rush. They had time. They knew that this tiny creature had nowhere to go. The lead lioness crouched low, the wind teasing through her thick fur, golden eyes narrowing in on the moment when fear would reach its peak. The foal stepped back, then again, until its hind legs hit a small mound, a weathered termite hill, struck by lightning long ago, now brittle like sun-baked bricks. It whinnied louder this time, desperate, as if crying out for the sky to bear witness. No answer came. No mother. No herd. Only shadows, tightening their grip. Then from the ridge, a sound barely audible broke through. Not thunder, not a roar, just the sound of hooves touching dry earth. A dark figure stepped out of the morning fog, tall, broad, and as silent as an ancient stone rising from the soil. The foal turned. Its eyes widened. The wind shifted. The horse that emerged did not whinny, did not gallop, did not charge. It simply walked, step by step, as if the whole prairie had paused to clear the way. Its coat was a mottled black and gray, its mane wild and unkempt, one eye veiled in a white scar, and its gait so firm it hushed the ground beneath it. The lions stopped. The lead lioness let out a low rumble from deep within her throat. She didn't understand, or maybe she understood too well. In the wild, there are creatures who don't need to roar to be heard. The foal stood frozen. Its legs shook, but its eyes no longer looked at the lions. They watched the dark figure. And then That figure stepped forward, placing itself between the weak and the danger. No command, no reason, just presence. The lead lioness hissed. One of the others moved left, attempting to flank, but the dark horse merely turned its head, the blind eye staring into the void, and the lions halted. For a moment, all of Clay Ridge went silent. Then, the lead lioness stepped back, one step, and the others followed slowly, deliberately, as if they had trespassed into something older, deeper, something unknowable. When the last shadow slipped into the tall grass, the old horse turned to the foal. It approached slowly, carefully, without a sound. Its nose brushed gently against the foal's neck, not commanding, just offering. A whisper from a world that should no longer exist. The foal backed up a little, but stopped. It didn't understand, but it knew something had changed. On a distant ridge, an old man with silver hair lowered his binoculars, his hand trembling. "Oh God, it's him," he whispered. "Storm Call, the horse no one could tame. And now he's just saved the one thing the plains had tried to forget." Dean Murphy clenched his jaw. Wind brushed through his hair, carrying the ghost of a legend he once saw but never dared believe would return. The foal still stood there, small, filthy, fragile. But for the first time since the storm, it was no longer alone. The morning wind over Clay Ridge whistled through the rocky crevices like voices calling from memory. Sunlight had yet to burn through the thin mist clinging to the ground, but slender beams of gold had begun to slip between the cracks in the valley. There, in a clearing, two beings stood, one old, one young, as if the world had momentarily forgotten how to move. The old horse bore the name Storm Call. At least, that was what humans had once called him, after the way he had once emerged from a thunderstorm nearly a decade ago, screaming wind from his lungs as if it echoed from the bones of the earth. He stood unmoving. A pale scar ran down the left side of his face, from eye socket to muzzle, rendering one eye sightless. But that mark was more than just a wound. It was a witness to all he had endured. Rejection by his herd, pursuit by humans, and denial by nature itself. The foal, still unnamed, lifted its head to gaze at Storm Call. The wind tousled its tiny forelock, revealing frightened eyes that had only just begun to settle. It didn't yet understand territory, honor, or trust. All it knew was that this large black horse had stood between it and death. Storm Call did little. He only lowered his head, breathed in the faint scent of the youngling, then turned away, as if to say, "Follow, if you want to survive." The foal hesitated, then took a quiet step forward. From the hilltop, Dean Murphy still watched. He had no camera, no field journal, just an aging ex-ranger trying to remember a chapter of life he'd buried long ago. From the old radio resting on the hood of his pickup, a static-laced voice crackled to life. "Dean, you there? This is Jamie Easton. I just got assigned to the Clay Ridge station. Everything okay?" Dean pressed the button. "Jamie, if you're not tied up, drive north. I think you should see this with your own eyes." Storm Call led the foal along forgotten trails paths no average traveler would notice between rock and grass. He didn't choose the closest route, nor the safest. He chose the kind only those who have endured know how to find. Each step, each turn, was a lesson. When the wind shifted, Storm Call stopped, turned his head left. The foal mimicked him, inhaled deeply. The air carried dust, stone, and animal scent. Storm Call stomped 3 times, brief, precise, then moved on. When they reached a small puddle nestled among 3 boulders, Storm Call didn't drink immediately. He stood still, watching. Only after several minutes did he lower his head. The foal followed suit, but waited. Lesson 2. Survival doesn't come from strength alone, but from patience and vigilance. That night, the rain came suddenly. The sky turned heavy, like someone pressing down from above, and the downpour fell like the world had split open. Stormcall didn't flee. He stood beneath a hollow in the stone ridge, turned sideways, and used his own body as a shield. The foal pressed against his chest, trembling but silent. They stood that way for an hour, thunder rolling like war drums across the horizon. Jamie Easton was one of the few young rangers who volunteered for Clay Ridge, a place no one really chose. She drove an old Jeep caked in red mud, bumping over uneven roads to meet Dean as promised. When she arrived, Dean pointed toward a rocky rise where he'd stationed his binoculars. Jamie climbed up, propped her lens, and looked down, speechless. She saw the old stallion Stormcall standing in an open field beside a tiny foal, two black shapes against pale gold grass. No ropes, no handlers, no fences, and between them something she had never seen before, a bond. "You were right," she whispered. "Unbelievable." Dean half smiled. "Start believing, Jamie, because if you don't, you'll never understand why that horse still walks this earth." In the days that followed, Stormcall and the foal never stayed in one place. They moved constantly from the valley edge to the western cliffs. Grass was still scarce, water spotty, and wolf tracks grew more frequent in the dark. But Stormcall always knew where to go and what to avoid. The foal began to understand his silent cues, a nod, a stomp, a barely there whinny. Stormcall taught through presence, not words. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Stormcall stopped atop a rocky ledge and gazed far into the distance. The plains below glowed orange-red, clouds drifting like slow-burning smoke. The foal stepped up beside him, staring in the same direction. Stormcall didn't turn, only lifted his left foreleg and tapped it 3 times on the stone. The foal copied him. And then, for the first time, Stormcall lowered his head, gently rubbed his muzzle along the foal's neck, and let out a deep, brief rumble. Not a warning, not a command, a confirmation. From now on, he would not walk alone. Dawn came later in Clay Ridge than anywhere else. The sun didn't leap over the horizon. It crawled, casting a shy amber glow, as if reluctant to disturb a silence that had lasted too long. There were no engines, no voices, just the hum of insects and the whisper of wind brushing over parched soil. And in that stillness, 2 silhouettes, a grown horse and a foal, walked across a land untouched by footprints for years. Stormcall led with steady steps. The foal followed, its gait still shaky, but growing stronger. The way it placed each hoof began to find rhythm, like learning an old dance only the earth remembered. 2 days had passed since their fateful encounter with the lions. Stormcall hadn't stopped. He didn't lead the foal to shelter. Instead, he took the young one through old ravined, faint animal trails and the rare resting spots scattered across red earth and loose rock. At night, when the rain came in light drizzles, Stormcall remained the wall. The foal, who had never slept beneath thunder without its mother, now lay peacefully beneath the thick legs of a stranger. It began to grow familiar with the scent of old horsehair, the steady warmth, and the slow, grounding breath of Stormcall. By day, Stormcall taught what no creature had ever taught the foal: how to read wind to avoid vultures, how to sniff water in the air before it fell, how to distinguish between wolf and hyena tracks. Stormcall never pushed. He demonstrated, and the foal watched. At first, the little one was clumsy. It cracked twigs, nearly slipped down cliff edges, but Stormcall didn't scold. He simply looked back, and that look alone was enough for the foal to stop and reconsider its steps. Across the plains, Jamie Easton was hunched over the flickering screen of an old ranger station computer. She had transferred audio logs from Dean Murphy's handheld radio onto a backup drive. One recording from 2 days ago still sent chills down her spine every time she replayed it. "Jamie, you haven't seen it yet, but I did 10 years ago in the middle of a dust storm. It didn't run, it didn't fear, and today it came back." She sprang to her feet, grabbed her radio. "Dean, this is Jamie. I'm heading out. I need to track Storm Call." On the other end, Dean hesitated. "You know he doesn't leave tracks like the others, right?" "Then I'll follow the foals." Storm Call and the young one reached a lowland with stone flats as smooth as tables. In the center, a shallow pool had collected from rain 3 nights ago. Sparse grass dotted the edges, just green enough to soften the bite of thirst. Storm Call drank first, then stood guard. The foal waited until he was sure it was safe lesson in order and in survival. After drinking, Storm Call approached a nearby rock, lowered himself, and began to roll slowly in the sticky red mud. The thick layer clung to his coat. The foal watched, blinked, then mimicked him. It toppled sideways, rolled over, coating its young fur in strange dark patches. Storm Call stood, exhaled a long breath, almost like laughter, if horses could laugh. Jamie and Dean arrived in a 4-wheel Jeep at the eastern edge of Clay Ridge, near a thicket of cactus perched dangerously close to a cliff. Dean brought his trusted binoculars, the same pair he'd used through 2 decades of ranger duty. Jamie said little, but her eyes betrayed both belief and doubt. Something was happening here that defied everything her books had taught. "Maybe I'm wrong," Dean muttered. "Maybe it's not Storm Call, but if it is, then that foal's been given a second chance most creatures never get." Jamie nodded. "And if it is him, then we don't interfere." That night, Storm Call and the foal rested beneath an old tree. The moon was not full, but it lit enough for shadows to breathe. The wind rustled the leaves gently, like the prairie, singing its lullaby. The foal lay down first. Storm Call stood a moment longer, then finally lowered himself beside it. Just before closing his eyes, Storm Call turned, placed his muzzle gently on the foal's back, a gesture not made lightly. In the wild, that meant one thing: you are mine to guard until morning. The foal couldn't speak, but it understood, not by blood, but by destiny. That morning arrived earlier than usual. A damp wind swept in from the northeast, carrying with it the scent of wet soil, rotting leaves, and something only creatures of instinct could sense. On a rocky ridge overlooking the lower Clay Ridge Valley, Storm Call stood like a monument carved from night. Below him the foal snorted and pawed at the soft earth. Not in fear, but in play. The little one was growing fast. In just 1 week of following Storm Call, its steps had steadied, its whinnies rang clearer, and its eyes no longer searched the sky, they had begun to look into the world. But with growth came truth. Its scent now traveled farther, its footprints easier to follow. And in the wild, no kind of maturity comes without risk. By midday, when the sun climbed high and pierced the canopy with golden beams, Storm Call stopped near a low ridge that sloped gently toward a wide valley below. The space opened wide, dotted with green pastures, but more importantly, it held signs of life. Not wolves, not men. Horses! Storm Call inhaled deeply. His chest expanded, then sank slowly. He didn't whinny, didn't look back. He simply lifted a hoof and moved forward, as if already knowing what waited below. The foal trotted behind, letting out a curious whinny. It didn't sense what Storm Call sensed, or, if it did, it didn't understand it. And then across the distant meadow, shadows began to appear. A herd of mustangs, at least 12, mostly mares and young ones, but also 2 mature stallions with thick, sculpted frames. They didn't gallop, didn't startle. They stood in a long line, heads high, ears alert. The sun caught their manes, making them look like warriors shaped from red stone. Storm Call halted. The foal did not. It let out a high-pitched whinny, not a call, but a burst of joy, like a child spotting something familiar. It began trotting toward the herd, but Stormcall stepped calmly forward, blocking its path. Not with force, not with warning, just presence. The foal stopped. The herd remained still. Then one mare older, her mane streaked with silver, her eyes fogged with age, stepped out from the line. Every step carried weight. Of memory, of time, of questions yet unanswered. Stormcall did not move. The old mare approached close enough that their breath touched. She bent her head and inhaled the foal's scent. The little one flinched slightly, but didn't back away. Instead, it let out a soft whimper, then rubbed its cheek against her front leg. She closed her eyes for a moment, and then something extraordinary happened. She turned to Stormcall not with contempt, not with suspicion, but with a long, unreadable gaze. The wind paused. And then she stepped forward and touched her head to the scar along his blind eye. No words were spoken, but forgiveness happened anyway. On the valley's edge, Dean and Jamie watched through binoculars. Jamie held her breath. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Dean nodded. "I see it, but I'm still not sure I believe it." Jamie lowered the lenses. "They're accepting him." Dean said nothing more. He had seen herds reject strangers, even orphaned foals. But this time, no one chased. No warnings were sounded, just silence, and something that felt like understanding. Meanwhile, Stormcall stood unmoved. The rest of the herd began to approach, one by one, each casting their own cautious glance. But there was no hostility. One younger mare lowered her head to sniff the foal's chest, then gently nudged it back toward Stormcall. The foal whinnied softly, then trotted to him, tucking its head beneath Stormcall's neck the way it did every night before sleep. This time it wasn't seeking shelter. It was finding home. The herd stood still. No one blocked them. No one pushed them away. A red-coated stallion stepped forward. Stormcall met his gaze, didn't flinch. The younger stallion didn't assert dominance. He merely glanced at the foal, then turned away. "They're not sizing him up with power," Jamie whispered. Dean replied, "They're weighing him against memory, who he was, who he's becoming." Later that evening, as the sun kissed the horizon, gold light spilled across the valley like a soft curtain. Stormcall stood among the herd, not at the center, but not outside either. Every horse kept some distance, but none turned away. The old mare, perhaps the matriarch, approached once more. This time she came close. She lowered her head and let out a short, quiet call, not a warning, but an invitation. Stormcall didn't call back. But he lowered his head. For the first time since being cast out, he bowed. Dean folded his binoculars, turned to Jamie. "Do you know what just happened?" Jamie nodded. Stormcall didn't return to his old herd, but he was just accepted by a new one. And not because he was stronger, but because he no longer needed to prove anything. Dean smiled. "Exactly. A leader doesn't always stand in front. Sometimes they just stand when others need it most." As night fell across Clay Ridge, the wind softened, carrying with it the scent of wild grass, dust, and something only the heart could name. The herd lay resting in the tall grass. Stormcall rested slightly off to the side, not in the center, but not alone. The foal lay curled close against his chest, breathing slow, eyes half closed. And Stormcall, he stayed awake. But for the first time in years, not to guard, but to feel what it meant to belong again. Nights in Clay Ridge were never truly dark. Even when the moon sank behind the solemn ridgelines, the stars scattered like silver horseshoes across the black canvas of sky. Wind rustled through dry shrubs, insects murmured through low grass, and every so often a lone whinny echoed from afar like a voice from memory calling back through time. Storm Call stood atop a small knoll, gazing down at the valley where the Mustang herd lay resting. Not far away, the foal curled beside a young mare, but now and then it still turned its head to look for him. Its young ears twitched at even the lightest sound, the world still too big to trust completely. And Storm Call was listening too, not for footsteps, not for predators, but for something deeper, an echo from a past no one spoke of, yet no one forgot. Clay Ridge Basin, 10 years ago. Back then, Storm Call had another name, a name given by humans when he was captured from the wild and brought to an auction pen. They called him Thunder Jack because his whinny carried farther than any stallion they'd ever heard. His body was powerful, his mane jet black, and his eyes shone with unbroken fire. But that was before they tried to break him. Other horses gave in accepted bridles, the whip, the pen, but not him. He didn't kick, didn't bite, didn't bolt. He just stood still and stared back, and it was that stare that scared the trainers most. Eventually, they sold him for next to nothing to a ranch near the outskirts of Yuma, where the owner thought a whip could replace kindness. Storm Call broke through the corral on his third night, shattered the wooden rails, and vanished into the desert with the first and last scar a human ever gave him. He returned to Clay Ridge, not as a defeated creature, but as one betrayed. At that time, the Clay Ridge herd was led by a stallion named Blackhorn Older, wise but cold. Blackhorn had no room for untamed souls. When Storm Call came back scarred, hollow-eyed, no longer blazing, he was seen as a threat. Storm Call didn't challenge him, but the herd made its choice. They turned their backs. He was driven to the outer edges of the territory-dry outcrops and broken stone, denied the watering holes, chased off any time he drew near. He became a ghost, not a foe, not a friend, just a presence. The ranger back then, Dean Murphy, had spotted him more than once, each time just a flicker of black through the mist. Locals called him the Ghost of Clay Ridge. Storm Call lowered his head now, exhaled. Those years had taught him silence, had taught him he didn't need a herd to survive. But since meeting the foal, something inside had shifted. Not ambition, not old dreams, but belief that maybe something hadn't ended yet. Below, the foal stirred and let out a soft whinny. It rose unsteadily, half asleep, and climbed the slope toward him, hooves uncertain on loose gravel. Storm Call heard the small crunch of stone, then saw the young figure appear beneath the starlight. It stopped before him, looked up, said nothing. Storm Call bent his head, touched forelock to brow, then gently nudged the foal's nape. A simple gesture, but enough. The foal curled at his feet and slept again. Across the ridge, Jamie and Dean slept in a small tent beside the truck. Jamie woke with a feeling she couldn't name. She slipped out, wrapped herself in her jacket, and grabbed the binoculars. She raised them and saw him. Storm Call, motionless on the ridge, neck tall, his scar catching the faint light of stars. The foal curled below him, breathing calmly. Jamie didn't speak. She recorded a short video, then set the camera down. In her field journal, she wrote, "The one they cast out now stands guard over the weakest. Maybe that's how a leader should be remembered." In the following days, Storm Call's presence among the herd no longer drew glances. The foal now ran among the other young ones, playfully nipping and bucking. The older stallion still kept a respectful distance, but no longer watched with suspicion. Still, Storm Call never stepped into the herd's center. He didn't lie with the main group, didn't compete for grazing, didn't lead. But whenever a strange sound stirred a rustle in the brush, the hoot of an owl too close, every eye turned to him, and he always rose first. One afternoon, while the herd grazed near a dry creek bed, the foal stumbled into a shallow sinkhole. Not deep, but enough to frighten. It cried out. Storm Call didn't rush. He walked slowly, calmly, lowered his head, and nudged the foals back, then gave a soft, rumbling growl, deep and low like distant thunder. The foal understood. It stood, climbed out. The entire herd watched. That night, one of the older mares lay down just a few paces from Storm Call for the first time. Around the campfire, Dean asked Jamie, "You think Storm Call wants to lead again?" Jamie shook her head. "No, he doesn't need to." Dean nodded. "And that's exactly why they've accepted him." She looked out past the firelight to where Storm Call stood. Same place as always, not at the center, but always, watching. The morning wind was no longer gentle. It swept across the Clay Ridge ridges like it carried a warning, slicing through narrow canyons and whipping mains into jagged flurries. Every creature on the plateau stirred uneasily. The Mustang herd moved slower. The mares gathered their young closer, no longer letting them wander as freely. There was something different in the air. Storm Call stood near the edge of the plains, where the land sloped into brush-thick lowlands. One ear twitched. A rustle beneath the dried leaves, barely more than a breath, and his one good eye locked sharply onto the source. 3 days earlier, a mare had gone missing after breaking off from the herd to search for water. The next morning, Jamie found blood and large cat tracks near the dry creek. "Not hyenas," she muttered to Dean, crouched by the gouged prints. "We've got lions in Clay Ridge again." Dean said nothing. He simply narrowed his eyes toward the woods, toward where Storm Call now stood, unmoving, like a carved sentinel against the coming storm. That afternoon, the herd headed south toward newer grazing grounds. Sparse rains in recent weeks had coaxed a fresh layer of green across the slopes, but the trail wound through Claybone Gorge. A narrow pass, barely wide enough for 2 horses side by side. Loose rock, thorn brush, steep walls, perfect for an ambush. Storm Call slowed as they neared the pass. He halted, lifted his head high, and inhaled deeply. His ears pressed back. His mane bristled. The foal, skipping behind, suddenly stopped. It felt it too. It pressed close to Storm Call's flank. From a hilltop, Jamie watched through binoculars. "He knows," she whispered. Dean nodded. "And if he knows, the herd still has time." The first lion appeared from the left. A young male, lean-shouldered, eyes alight with hunger. He didn't growl. He moved like smoke, hugging the edge of stone, waiting for the herd to enter the narrow choke. Storm Call turned. He walked straight toward the outcrop where the lion crouched, not running, not charging. But each step struck the ground like a war drum. The foal whinnied in panic, but Storm Call didn't glance back. When only a few yards remained, the lion tensed, coiled, ready to spring. Then Storm Call released a sound that hadn't been heard in years. It wasn't a whinny. It was deeper, older, a thunderous, bone-rattling roar that echoed across the canyon like the voice of the earth itself. The lion froze. For the first time in its life, it faced prey that didn't run. Storm Call charged, no hesitation. No doubt. He slammed into the predator with the weight of a landslide. The lion tumbled into a thorny thicket, letting out a sharp cry, then vanished into the rocks bleeding, limping, but alive. Back in the gorge, the herd froze. The foal ran to Storm Call, now dust-covered and scraped. He didn't flinch. His gaze was still locked across the pass. The second lion appeared smarter than the first. It crept from the opposite slope, lower, quieter. Some of the mares saw it. They neighed, frightened. The young ones bunched tightly together. But no one knew what to do. Storm Call moved again. This time, not head-on. He arced down from the higher slope like a black streak of lightning. The lion tried to adjust, misstepped, and skidded. Storm Call smashed shoulder first into its ribs, throwing it off balance. Then he bellowed deep, commanding loud enough to shake the thorn trees. The third lion never came. After the brief chaos, the herd stood silent, hearts pounding, legs trembling. The foal pressed its face into Stormcall's shoulder, a small whimper rising. "Is it over?" Stormcall exhaled. His legs shook slightly now. Blood trickled from a gash on his shoulder. But he remained standing, tall, still, the gatekeeper of Claybone. The herd didn't move. Not until the old mare, the matriarch, stepped forward, leading the mares and foals past him. As they passed, she lowered her head, not in submission, but in honor. Jamie, watching from above, raised her camera just in time to catch the moment Stormcall turned to the foal and brushed its muzzle gently before following the herd. No rush, no fear, as if they had never been hunted at all. Dean whispered, "You just witnessed something no one would believe without seeing it." Jamie nodded. "He's no longer a legend. He's real." That night, Stormcall lay only a few steps from the others. The foal curled at his side, as always. But this time, 2 mares chose to bed near him, not for hierarchy, but for the safety he carried. Stormcall closed his eyes. His breath was steady. The blood had dried. But he didn't dream of battle. He dreamt of their eyes, how each had looked at him as they passed through Claybone, not with doubt, but with thanks. A lifetime of exile, redefined by one moment standing between death and those who had never called him brother. The sun rose slowly that morning, as if even it knew the stage belonged to something greater. Pale gold spilled gently over dew-wet earth, streaking through branches, catching on patches of mud, clinging to the backs of the mustangs. After the chaos at Claybone, the prairie had gone quiet. No birds, no footsteps, only wind, and the unmistakable sense that something had changed. For good. Stormcall walked slowly, not at the front, not at the rear, just beside them. A few paces away, close enough to see everything, distant enough not to disturb the rhythm. His shoulder still bore crusted blood and patches of dried mud. The foal trotted at his flank, occasionally lifting its head, checking still there. Always there. Jamie Easton drove north around Clay Ridge, hoping to catch the herd before they disappeared into the lowlands. She parked her Jeep in a broad clearing where the light was just right. Her camera was ready. She had no formal plan, only a need to capture one moment. A moment of a creature once cast aside, now, becoming a symbol. And then she saw him. Stormcall, walking through light, no longer myth, but motion. Not grand, not glorious, just right. The foal ran ahead, let out a soft whinny, then turned its head. Stormcall paused, turned, slowly. Their eyes met. Jamie hit record. Her camera had no mic, but the light told the story. So did Stormcall's gaze. Dean, standing beside her, whispered, "You could film the whole world and still never capture that look again." Jamie didn't reply. She filmed until the herd vanished behind the brush, then lowered her camera and sighed. Weeks passed, lion sightings dropped. Wolf tracks grew rare. The Clay Ridge Mustangs still roamed, but not as fugitives. They didn't hide. They chose where to graze, where to rest, and where to drink on their own terms. Stormcall never claimed the lead stallion role, but every morning he rose first. And every night he was the last to lie down. The foal had grown, no longer curling under Stormcall's chest to sleep, but always nearby. When the herd moved, it glanced at Stormcall before turning. When strange sounds echoed, it looked to him before calling out. One late afternoon, a sharp wind rushed across the tall grass, rustling stalks with a noise like teeth. The younglings spooked. The herd's rhythm broke. Mothers called. Chaos loomed. Stormcall stood. No neigh, no rush, just stillness, and everything stopped. Jamie wrote in her field journal, "A horse doesn't need to speak to be heard. It just needs to stand when it matters most. That night by the fire, Dean asked, "You think he knows he's growing old?" Jamie replied, "I think he knows, but I don't think it matters anymore." Dean raised a brow. "Why not?" She looked out toward the open plain where Stormcall stood like a shadow stitched to the earth. "Because he's leaving behind something that will outlive him." One morning, as golden light draped the plains, the herd stopped at a white sandbank near a shallow lake. Dozens, hundreds of hoofprints covered the ground like a song written in time. The foal, now near-grown, galloped along the shoreline, whinnying into the breeze. Jamie raised her lens, caught the moment, but within seconds it stopped, turned, searched. And in the distance, Stormcall still stood. He hadn't followed, hadn't called. He simply stood, looking toward the lake, where sunlight shimmered like memory, one eye blind, the other full of light. The young horse ran back, not out of fear, not to be protected, but because that was where it learned how to face the world. Stormcall didn't live forever. His story spread through conservation circles, told by Jamie, by Dean, through blurry photos and soundless videos. But none of that truly mattered. What mattered was this. The young horses now knew to stand in a line when sounds came. They knew to stop when an elder stamped 3 times. They knew to lower their heads when passing a rise where once a stallion had stood between death and all that was wild. Stormcall didn't need a statue. He had been etched into the very way the herd moved, a scar left in the wind. A shadow lions didn't dare challenge, a single stand remembered for a lifetime. And in that final sunset behind Clay Ridge, Jamie stood on the ridge, looking out over the prairie, eyes glistening. The wind carried the scent of dust, wild grass, and something only the heart could name. Stormcall doesn't need to be remembered as a leader, she whispered. He only needs to be remembered as the one who stood when everyone else ran. Below her, the shadow of a black stallion stretched long across the earth. Not a legend, but the truth. If your heart tightened the moment, Stormcall turned his head to the foal. Leave a 1 in the comments below. Let us know you still believe in compassion, even in the wild. And if you want to continue this journey with extraordinary wild beings like Stormcall, subscribe to True Animal Stories now. What's coming next will move you even deeper. We'll be right here telling the next story. All you have to do is stay.